It's the Wilk Report. I'm Michael Wilk, coming to you from Cleveland, Ohio. Back from vacation after a week. I was visiting friends in Massachusetts. I'm working this weekend. And of course, there's Thanksgiving coming up this week. So I was going to go ahead and review episode 4 of Batwoman, but that would have required me to bash my head in the refrigerator door to suppress the trauma of having watched it. And I really don't want to have to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and do a story on something that I was reading about last week, where it shows Kathleen Kennedy lying again, saying that there was no source material to adapt for the Star Wars sequel trilogy. And of course, this is dishonest because there was plenty of material. And of course, this goes into some other stuff that I'm going to cover after our first news item. So let me go ahead and go to that, which is from Bounding Into Comics. This is from November 21st. Kathleen Kennedy on the difficulty of making Star Wars sequel films. Quote, "There's no source material. We don't have comic books," end quote. And of course, there was Star Wars Dark Empire highlighted right next to the caption. So yeah, she's deliberately lying, and she knows she's lying. Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy stated the Star Wars sequel trilogy films are incredibly difficult to make because they don't have source material and they don't have comic books. Kennedy was asked by Rolling Stone if the final entry in the Star Wars sequel trilogy was a particularly hard nut to crack. She responded, "Every one of these movies is a particularly hard nut to crack. There's no source material. We don't have comic books. We don't have 800-page novels. We don't have anything other than passionate storytellers who get together and talk about what the next iteration might be." Now, wait a minute. This is a lie, okay? And even the Bounding Into comic books article writer, John Trent, says, this is a lie. There is no other way to describe it. It's a lie. Disney CEO Bob Iger admitted they received outlines from George Lucas about what the sequel trilogy would look like in his recent book. Iger wrote, "At some point in the process, George told me that he had completed outlines for 3 new movies. He agreed to send us 3 copies of the outlines, one for me, one for Alan Braverman, and one for Alan Horn, who'd just been hired to run our studio. Alan Horn and I read George's outlines and decided we needed to buy them, though we made clear in the purchase agreement that we would not be contractually obligated to adhere to the plot lines he'd laid out." And this goes to my earlier video about how George Lucas felt betrayed by Disney and Bob Iger. So not only did Disney have Lucas's outline, but they also had access to a plethora of novels, video games, and comic books about Star Wars. They had source material, they had comic books, and they had lengthy novels. I mean, the Thrawn trilogy, for crying out loud. You're telling me you could not have adapted that? Or what about the Yuzan Vong War, which saw the Solo twins lose their younger brother, Anakin Solo, and then the aftermath of that, where Jason Solo turns to the dark side, and Jaina, his sister, ends up having to fight him to the death. You could have adapted that. You chose not to. So let me go on. Dark Horse Comics began publishing Star Wars comics in 1991 with Dark Empire, Star Wars Tales of the Jedi, Empire's End, Crimson Empire, Jedi Academy Leviathan, Dark Forces, Jedi Knight, Mara Jade by the Emperor's Hand, and more. Before Dark Horse Comics began publishing Star Wars comics, they were published by Marvel Comics. Yeah, Marvel. So why could you not have adapted the Marvel comic books? Are you telling me you didn't have any? Bullshit, you didn't have any. There's one thing I hate more than anything. It's being lied to. Or lied about. Because people don't want to grow up and be honest. Because they've got agendas of their own they want to push, and they want to get stuff that they know they couldn't get by telling the truth, so they just lie to you. And hope that you're too stupid to understand that you're being lied to. It's an insult to the intelligence. To lie to someone is to insult that person's intelligence. Because you're assuming that person is too dumb to know he or she is being lied to. And most of the time we actually do know when we're being lied to. And those times when we don't, it's because we don't want to believe that someone would lie about something. So when we find out, we get angry. And we have every right to be angry because we were insulted. So yeah, before Dark Horse Comics began publishing Star Wars, they were published by Marvel Comics. The original Star Wars Marvel series, first published in 1977 and ran through 1986. There were 107 issues total. Interestingly enough, Star Wars number 49, published in April 1981, was titled The Last Jedi. And here's a screen cap right here above on the screen. Yeah, right here above the next paragraph. Star Wars, The Last Jedi. And it shows a picture of Luke with his lightsaber. Some kind of weird sea monkey looking alien with a rather long stick or something that he's wielding like a sword. There are also plenty of Star Wars novels. Maybe the most famous is the Thrawn trilogy, written by Timothy Zahn, that includes Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command. Disney also introduced Thrawn into their Star Wars canon in Star Wars Rebels. That's right, they literally took a character from a novel and stuck him in a canon TV show. They also introduced a Hammerhead-class cruiser ship in Rogue One. The ship was first introduced to Star Wars lore in the 2003 video game Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic. And again, here's up on the screen, shows it. However, there's also the Jedi Academy trilogy by Kevin J. Anderson, all the Jedi Apprentice books, The Last of the Jedi books by Jude Watson, the Rebel Force books by Alex Wheeler, and Galaxy of Fear series by John Whitman. There are literally dozens, if not hundreds, of Star Wars novels that Disney could have pulled from. They also had the prequel and sequel trilogies to look at as well. In fact, one could argue that The Force Awakens is a beat-for-beat remake of the original Star Wars movie. And it's true. Despite this obvious lie, Kennedy continued to detail the process Lucasfilm went about to create the sequel trilogy. We go through a really normal development process that everybody else does. You start by talking to filmmakers who you think exhibit the sensibilities that you're looking for. She argues this is a very small list, and I would argue that the list is very small. People who really do have the sensibilities about these kinds of movies, and then the experience and the ability to handle how enormous a job these movies are. So we're trying to be as thoughtful as we possibly can about making those choices. Yeah. Nobody's buying that, and neither is the article here. I don't buy this argument either. The Marvel Cinematic Universe films are arguably just as big as Star Wars films, and they are finding new talent all the time. Before Captain America: The Winter Soldier, Joe and Anthony Russo had predominantly done TV series. They went on to direct Captain America: Civil War, Avengers: Infinity War, and Avengers: Endgame. Before James Gunn did Guardians of the Galaxy and subsequently Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, he directed Slither and Super and 8 episodes of a TV series called PG Porn. He's now working on Suicide Squad and will be working on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Before Jon Favreau directed Iron Man, he had directed Elf and Zathura, a space adventure, along with a few TV movies. Now, interesting enough, Zathura was actually a quasi-sequel to Jumanji. It was adapted from a book written by the same author of Jumanji. So, yeah, a little bit of trivia there. But he also did some TV movies. He went on to direct Iron Man 2, Cowboys and Aliens, which was blatantly stolen from the original creator, which I've detailed here. The Jungle Book and The Lion King. Black Panther director Ryan Coogler had only 2 major directing credits before he did Black Panther. He had done Creed and Fruitvale Station. Black Panther did pretty well at the box office, and it was a solid entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I actually reviewed that movie for this channel last year. Great film. It had flaws. All right, don't get me wrong. It was not perfect. I would give it a 7.5 out of 10. 7.5 out of 10. Just because they tried to cram so much into the movie that I felt that the overall story suffered. So And of course, there was a crappy CGI, especially in the third act. Yeah, it was just awful. But it was a solid film, okay? And I think it was a lot deeper than a lot of critics tend to give it credit for, although it did have limitations because it is a Marvel movie and, there's only so deep you can go when you're under orders to deliver certain scenes, like action sequences, stuff like that. So, but, it's still very good, you know? But if the sensibilities Kathleen Kennedy is talking about is wanting to destroy the character of Luke Skywalker, she's certainly right about that. It is a small sensibility. Kennedy continues lying that some people get overwhelmed with the enormity of Star Wars. I would also argue that sometimes people get involved in the normal development process and then they realize, oh my god, this is so much more than I ever imagined. So it's pretty common that when you're working on movies, you're not making choices and decisions that necessarily work out exactly the way you want from the get-go. It's been an evolving process with lots of people and lots of opinions, and then you try to shape something into what it eventually becomes. She then details that Jar Jar Abrams wished he directed all 3 of the Star Wars movies, but says that would not have been really physically possible. Bullshit. Absolute fucking bullshit. So I feel really fortunate that I've worked with so many great people that have been absolutely committed, Jar Jar being one of them. He's a huge fan, incredibly passionate about Star Wars. Oh, well, then why did he make such shallow, one-dimensional movies that disrespected the original material? It couldn't even be bothered to do anything original. I mean, beat-for-beat remake of A New Hope. Come on. He's a hack. So yeah, it's a, oh my god. But yeah, for her to just lie about not having source material, it's just unbelievable that she thinks we are this bloody stupid. I mean, it's just insane. And it might explain why her future at Star Wars is rather uncertain, because Hollywood Reporter, as of November 20th, Star Wars uncertainty extends to Kathleen Kennedy's Disney future. The Lucasfilm chief has a director lined up for a 2022 movie, even as she has yet to settle on the direction for the marquee franchise's evolving mythology or her own future. Which is telling. Are there any fans more implacable than Star Wars fans? Probably not. And with the rise of Skywalker, aka Episode 9, set to wrap up the original saga when it opens December 20th, it's fair to say that some are waiting with knives out. Yeah, I got the pun. Don't think that we're laughing because it's not funny. To see what comes next. The overarching and billion-dollar questions for Disney: where does the Star Wars universe go from here? Will Lucasfilm president Kathleen Kennedy stay or exit? Will Disney CEO Bob Iger and the film studio chief Alan Horn give her the chance to steer this bulky behemoth into a smooth flight path? And given the rocky recent past filled with fired and sidelined directors and aborted projects, which movie makers would even dare to take on the next phase of Star Wars? Asked to comment on these topics, Disney has nothing to say. All eyes on Episode 9, please. And Kennedy, 66, may be reading into the silence. Asked how long she might stick around in her job, she recently told Rolling Stone what happens in the future and how long and how much longer do I do this? I don't know yet. I'm looking at all of that. Yeah, because if you remember, last year, the rumor mill was circulating that Kathleen Kennedy would be departing from Lucasfilm because of the failure of The Last Jedi and the controversy, and also the failure of Solo. Because The Last Jedi did half of what it was originally projected to do, angered a lot of fans, focused a lot of attention on the glaring shortcomings in The Force Awakens. So yeah, and it seems that Disney had no one who actually wanted the thankless task of taking over and cleaning up after Kathleen Kennedy. So basically they gave her an extension on her contract. And I'm thinking that if Episode 9 fails, as many are predicting it will, for reasons that I will go into shortly, then she'll probably be shown the door. Kennedy hasn't offered any specifics, but the new Disney Plus series of Mandalorian seems to provide a strong hint that regarding her ideas about how to plot the future of Star Wars, if she's given the opportunity. Note that those plans involve a very limited role for Marvel Studios chief Kevin Feige, who is set to produce his own film take on the franchise. So yeah, on the 13th of November, Disney held a premiere showing 3 episodes of The Mandalorian at its El Capitan Theater in Hollywood. Unsurprisingly, creator Jon Favreau was the star of the night. Perhaps some of the most lavish praise for the Mandalorian experience came from eccentric filmmaker and Mandalorian actor Werner Herzog, who raved about the cutting-edge technology on display in the series, but his words seemed to be freighted with meaning beyond that. What you are creating is an entire universe. This universe is filled with new mythology. Not very often in the cultural history have we had new mythologies, and I find it very significant. So creating a new mythology is, of course, a challenge that Disney faces with Star Wars. Kennedy is an experienced and competent producer, but she is not a creative visionary. And let me highlight this for you, just to reiterate. She is not a creative visionary. Favreau seems to be. George Lucas certainly was a creative visionary because he was the one who created Star Wars. And he created this entire Bible and manuscript before he even started shooting. So he had a plan. I mean, I've got my problems with George Lucas as a storyteller and as someone who keeps trying to tweak and rework his own best work because he's constantly second-guessing stuff that he did that actually worked the first time. So, and, you know, of course, I'm talking about the special edition version of the original trilogy, but, you know, you cannot deny that he is a creative visionary. Kennedy? No. She's just a producer. And no matter how competent she might have been as a producer, that's all she was. She was not the creative visionary behind Steven Spielberg's films. That was Steven Spielberg who was a creative visionary. So who better than Favreau to play a leading role in charting the course? He's got fan loyalty. He's got the experience working on different movies. I mean, yeah, so with or without Kennedy, sources say it seems likely that Favreau will have a lot to say over the future of Star Wars. These sources also say Kennedy's ideal team includes key roles for Michelle Rejwan, a producer on Episode 9, and Lucasfilm's Senior VP Live-Action Development and Production, and Dave Filoni, the veteran animation director and George Lucas' protege who directed live-action for the first time with 2 episodes of Mandalorian. Even if remaining at Lucasfilm is not in the cards for Kennedy, this plan would enable her to trumpet that she has done the job she was hired to do, completing the Skywalker saga, and left the franchise in good hands. But here's the thing. She has not completed this Skywalker saga because they haven't actually done a sequel wrapping up the Skywalker saga. And of course, she and Jar Jar Abrams disrespect George Lucas as a comment on George Lucas's disappointment with The Force Awakens. Back in 2015, George Lucas suggested that he wasn't particularly impressed by Star Wars The Force Awakens, although much of the headlines at the time centered on his comments comparing Disney to white slavers. Nevertheless, we got some further insight this year thanks to Disney chief Bob Iger's book, with Iger revealing that Lucas was angry, upset, and disappointed with the direction that Disney and Lucasfilm opted to go with for Episode 7 and the rest of the sequel trilogy. And now both Lucasfilm chief Kathleen Kennedy and The Force Awakens and Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker director Jar Jar Abrams have weighed in with their shallow thoughts on Lucas's reaction. Quote, I think there's plenty of examples where people create something that is fundamental to who they are, where it's difficult letting go and watching that become something different, said Kennedy in an interview with Rolling Stone. So I think initially that was difficult for George. I don't think he anticipated how hard that would be. And Jar Jar came into it with such enthusiasm and frankly reverence. No, he didn't come into it with reverence. He completely disrespected everything George Lucas did. But yeah, so, and then Hart had to find what was personal for him. He had to make it his own. Every director who comes into a movie has to make something his or her own. He or she has to find uh, something in the storytelling, and that's going to become a different point of view. And I think that's all George was reacting to. So basically, Kennedy is lying. Basically saying, oh, he's just having trouble letting go. It was his baby, and we have to do, new things with it. And yeah, bullshit. Come on. Abrams, meanwhile, who has since consulted with Lucas during development on Star Wars The Rise of Skywalker, also shared his thoughts on learning that the creator of the galaxy far, far away wasn't particularly impressed with his vision. Well, Abrams has no vision. He's just a hack director, hack writer, who doesn't have an original bone in his body, and doesn't even have any love for the material he's adapting. He's on record as thinking that Star Wars was too Star Trek, was too cerebral. Basically, the implication is that he had to dumb it down to his level in order to make a movie that he could enjoy, and then he destroyed that franchise before turning it over to Alex Klutzman, who is a serial liar and thief, and did further damage. But yeah, let's go ahead and see his disrespect. It's probably a complicated thing for him, said Abrams, to decide you're going to sell this thing that you created that was your baby to anyone. That must be more complicated than signing a check and smiling about it, but he's been incredibly gracious. He's been super generous. He came over. We had a meeting when he first started working on The Rise of Skywalker. Talked through a ton of different ideas and stories and heard from him what was important. And we've done nothing but try and adhere to some fundamental aspects of the story. It wasn't a difficult thing to try and do, and again, he was really gracious, and I'm only grateful. Do I wish that The Force Awakens had been his favorite movie of all time? Yes, I only want it to do well by him. I would just say that I have nothing but profound respect for the guy, and am still truly even more so now, working on these movies in awe of what he created. Well, no, you're not. If you respected him, you would not have destroyed his movies. You would not have basically rebooted the original Star Wars with a shallower version that basically just ripped off everything that was good, and you would have treated the property with far more respect than you did. So you're lying here. Come on. The idea was to continue the story and begin with this young woman who felt like Luke Skywalker was a myth. But why? Why? Because, the people who destroyed the Empire, who brought it down, killed Palpatine, redeemed Darth Vader from the dark side, and then you destroy all that and send them into obscurity so that people think they're only myths and legends. Come on. Dude. You intentionally destroyed the original trilogy so you could start over with something that was just a shallow retread. So yeah, he's addressing criticisms from both Lucas and fans that The Force Awakens was a rehash of A New Hope, and to tell a story that was not just history repeating itself, but a story that embraced the movies that we know as the actual history of this galaxy, so that they are still living in a place where there is good versus evil. They're still living in the shadow of what has come before, still grappling with the sins of the father and the people who have preceded them. This was not about a nostalgia play. Bullshit. You use nothing but nostalgia in order to reel people into The Force Awakens, and then you basically trashed the original trilogy at the behest of Kathleen Kennedy. So he's completely lying here. And then Kathleen Kennedy, on November 25th, said, we sat down with George before writing Rise of Skywalker. And this is from Collider.com by Tom Ryman, or Riemann. I'm not sure how he pronounces it, but I'm going to assume Ryman. It may seem like Disney has done everything but file a restraining order against George Lucas to keep him away from the Star Wars franchise ever since they bought Lucasfilm in 2012 for roughly $4 billion in cash and stocks. But according to Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy, they actually consulted the bearded one before scripting The Rise of Skywalker, the final installment to the epic saga Lucas began back in 1977. Yeah, because you completely destroyed Star Wars to the point where you had to bring Lucas back to try and salvage what you had wrecked. Want to know why Rian Johnson can't give a date for when he's even going to start shooting for his trilogy? Because there is no trilogy. It's been canceled. And yeah, Disney shows can pretend all they want that it's not happening, but they can't even greenlight a sequel trilogy by the idiots behind Game of Thrones because they wrecked that so badly that they basically were told, no, you're not getting your trilogy after all because you just fucked up Game of Thrones, and we don't want that happening over here because we've already fucked up Star Wars. We don't want to fuck it up even more. And if you think Rian Johnson, who arguably did the most after Jar Jar Abrams to fuck up Star Wars, is getting a trilogy, not happening. And here's another one from 411 Mania or 411mania.com. But yeah, it's basically reiterating how they consulted with Lucas on The Rise of Skywalker. But yeah, Kathleen Kennedy lying her ass off, saying that there was no material to adapt for Star Wars sequel trilogy. And assuming that you're too stupid to realize you're being lied to. It's like fucking George Orwell, you know? I mean, the idea that you can, exercise doublethink and pretend that none of that ever happened, except that it did. It's still out there. People still own physical media. Like actual comic books, trade paperbacks, novels that they've collected over the decades. And you're going to go ahead and lie to us and say that there was no source material to adapt for the sequel trilogy? No, you had plenty of source material to adapt. You just didn't want to use it. If you had simply said that, instead of lying, I don't think people would be nearly as upset. So I don't know why you think it's okay to lie to people. I mean, it's not like it's not like your people have any respect for you, Kathleen Kennedy, because you've done nothing but disrespect us, and you only get the respect that you earn. So, I don't know if you're just trying to salvage your already worthless reputation at this point, but you're doing a bad job even of that because, again, people don't like being lied to. They don't like having their intelligence insulted. But here again, you're proving that you're just an asshole who decided at the behest of Disney, well, we want to undo the end of The Return of the Jedi so we can resurrect a trilogy that was already basically finished and keep churning movies out every year like on a factory conveyor belt. And you decided that you were going to go along with that because you wanted to keep your job, but you went forward with no creative vision whatsoever. All you had to do was identify someone who actually respected Star Wars, respected the original material, to be the creative drive behind it. You could have maintained your role as a producer and said, okay, yeah, fine, I'll be the one to find the visionary. You could have taken credit for that, but no, you want it to be the creative visionary, even though you haven't got a creative fucking bone in your body. Unbelievable. What do you think, ladies and gentlemen? Let me know in the comments below. I want to hear from you. If you like what you've heard and you want to hear more, hit the subscribe button and the bell icon to receive notifications whenever we upload new content. Hit that like button, share this video. If you want to help support the channel, head over to our Patreon or subscribe to our page. We can't do this without you. I'm also doing a tech fundraiser, link below. Until next time, this is Michael Wilk for the Wilk Report saying take care, good night, I'm out.